Perhaps we need some outside universal threat. I occasionally think how quickly our differences worldwide would vanish if we were facing an alien threat from outside this world.
Think of how all the differences among people on Earth would seem small if we felt threatened by a space invader. That's the whole theory of independence.
You're right.
Everybody gets together and makes nice, and, you know.
You and Bill O'Reilly would be hiding in a bunker together.
Several U.S. presidents are on record talking about the UFO mystery.
Yeah, Presidents Jimmy Carter, Ronald Reagan both had UFO sightings of their own, but the current presidential campaign might be the first in which UFO disclosure has been championed by a major party candidate.
When we had your husband, President Clinton, on this show, he said, I asked him about UFOs in Area 51, and if you looked in, because if I was president, that's the first thing I do. I go right into those files and see what was going on.
Right.
And he said that he did do that.
Yes.
And that he didn't find anything.
Well, I'm gonna do it again.
Yeah, why not?
Right? And you know, there's a new name. It's unexplained aerial phenomenon.
Unexplained aerial phenomenon, really?
Yep, UAP. That's the latest nomenclature.
I like the old one. I like UFO. I don't know why.
On May 9th, 2001, 20 military, government, and corporate witnesses held a press conference in Washington, D.C. Their testimony would make history. This was the most watched event in the history of the National Press Club.
There is no evidence, I wish to emphasize, that these life forms from elsewhere are hostile towards us.
Wernher von Braun was one of the top scientists brought to the U.S. from Germany after World War II as part of Operation Paperclip. He invented the V-2 rocket for Adolf Hitler and became the chief architect of the Saturn V rocket for NASA's Apollo moon missions. In his deathbed confession, von Braun warned of a plot to pull off the ultimate false flag, using back-engineered alien reproduction vehicles to stage an invasion from outer space.
When von Braun was dying in front of me the very first day that I met him, he assured me that he would live a few more years in order to tell me about the game that was being played, that game being the effort to weaponize space, to control the Earth from space and space itself. The strategy that Wernher von Braun taught me was that first the Russians were the enemy against whom we're going to build space-based weapons. Then terrorists would be identified. Then we were going to identify third world country crazies. We now call them nations of concern. But he said that would be the third enemy against whom we would be needing to build space-based weapons. And the next enemy was asteroids. Now at this point, he kind of chuckled the first time he said it. Asteroids, against asteroids, we're going to build space-based weapons. The last card is the alien card, and all of it, he said, over and over and over during the 4 years that I knew him and was giving his speeches for him, he would bring up that last card. And remember, Carol, the last card is the alien card. We're going to have to build space-based weapons against aliens, and all of it, he said, is a lie. He didn't mention a timeline, but he said that it was going to be speeding up faster than anybody could possibly imagine. That the effort to put weapons in space was not only based on a lie, but would accelerate past the point of people even understanding it until it was already up there and too late.
I occasionally think how quickly our differences worldwide would vanish if we were facing an alien threat from outside this world.
Well, the only problem with that is that if you look at the technologies that permit for interplanetary and interstellar travel, it's 1,000 times more developed than a hydrogen bomb. What are the technologies that would permit an interstellar civilization to go from one star system to another? Now, we're not talking about Elon Musk's SpaceX or the Apollo rocket. We're talking technologically advances that are in the hundreds of thousands to millions of years past what we have operating on this planet. Those technological breakthroughs, if they were weaponized and in the possession of a hostile force, would be so devastating that you could target a planet and turn it into a pink mist floating through the cosmos if you were a hostile entity, which, if we were to have a massive exchange of nuclear weapons, would leave most of all life on Earth extinguished. Therefore, how could we possibly have armed conflict with another planetary system for more than a nanosecond and survive it? They know that we couldn't. If they were a threat, you would know it by now, and we would not be having this conversation and breathing the free air of Earth. It would have been point, set, match, over. But it's a way of manipulating the public through demagoguery of fear, jingoism, false nationalism, and creating a boogeyman out in space. Some years ago, I had a meeting with the Crown Prince of Liechtenstein, Hans Adam von Liechtenstein. He had reached out to me through some of his contacts. He said, look, Dr. Greer, we have to meet, but we can't talk about this on the phone. Your efforts to effect disclosure are noble, but they will not be able to be permitted, and not for the reasons you think. I said, well, this is interesting. Finally, we got together in New York City in July of 1994. He said to me, in 1989, a group of us were trying to do disclosure, and it involved Gorbachev, President Bush Sr., himself, and the UN Secretary General Pérez de Cuellar. And in the course of us putting together the high-level planning meetings to do this, Pérez de Cuellar, the UN Secretary General, was abducted out of his limousine in Manhattan. He was told by the aliens that if they did not cease and desist from their plans to disclose this information, that every world leader involved, including the President of the United States, would be abducted. This blew up like an atomic bomb in the Bush White House, and it did not go forward. I said, okay, well, tell me more. He says, well, we've concluded that we have to prepare the public for an interplanetary war. And in doing so, we can then also force the return of Christ. And I'm quoting. And I just listened. He didn't know that I knew that the means for that abduction for Pérez de Cuellar were run by a counterintelligence unit out of the national security state that had the technologies to simulate an alien craft and aliens run completely by military assets, and that there was a deeper part of these unacknowledged special access projects that were zooming even people like Bush Sr., who was on the committee but had lost control of some of these renegade factions. This is a very complicated story. Pérez de Cuellar being abducted caused him to stop that process. It manipulated these leaders into going onto a war footing. And he confessed to me that the reason he was funding the work of the abduction groups was because they wanted to put information out to the public that would scare the public so that people would make the sacrifice in blood and treasure to have an interplanetary war. Now, this is 25 years ago. It was not a happy meeting for me.
If there's any one thing that is going to mobilize people to allow the national security state to establish full spectrum dominance over our planet, it is this.
Counterintelligence efforts reach a new level of absurdity with the staging of host events like cattle mutilations and alien abductions. In 2017, retired Air Force intelligence officer Richard Doty made history when he admitted on camera that unacknowledged special access projects within the military do indeed stage alien abductions to lay the psychological foundation for an interplanetary conflict sometime in the near future.
We did do that, yes. OSI did that. There was a special group out of the 7602nd Air Intel Wing at Fort Belvoir. They came out and did that. They had these people that had maybe some sort of defects, anatomical defects that were brought in to fool people into thinking they're aliens. Yeah.
Within the intelligence communities, they have something called ace in the hole technologies.
So secret they didn't even talk about it.
November 12th of 1988 was their dog and pony show, a classified military exhibit at Norton Air Force Base.
And then off in a separate section of the hangar behind a curtain, which was opened up once everyone had gathered, were 3 of these so-called alien reproduction vehicles, or ARVs. The craft itself was hovering off the floor with no landing gear underneath it, nothing supporting it from above. To see something, travel across 12 miles of airspace in under a second and a half, make a couple of right-angle turns, and not make a supersonic shockwave of any kind, no sonic boom, which I've personally witnessed on a number of occasions. I mean, it changes your whole perspective.
There were some very good folks, like Secretary Forrestal, and others who wanted to bring the subject out, but in a way that would be peaceful. But there were other people who saw the big gold mine of militarism and war profiteering and the psychological warfare value.
Their mandate, their mandate is to lie, deny, and deceive.
There are people who've had experiences with the technology that were not able to handle it psychologically because it defies reality.
And in this document, the CIA director, Walter Smith, says, "I am today transmitting to the National Security Council a proposal in which it is concluded that the problems connected with unidentified flying objects appear to have implications for psychological warfare as well as for intelligence and operations." We have to take a step back from all the jargon and all the paranoia in Star Wars movies for just a minute and realize that it's very easy to set up a false flag operation.
A false flag operation, also known as a false indication and warning, is a military tactic in which you create the illusion of a threat, often by attacking yourself and blaming the desired enemy. It's proven extremely effective at uniting the public around a perceived threat.
And this is actually a well-known concept in military intelligence circles. We did it in the Gulf of Tonkin in Vietnam, where we exaggerated, if not completely staged, an attack on our naval vessels so we would stampede President Johnson and the Congress into vastly expanding the Vietnam conflict to benefit, guess who, the military-industrial complex and the war profiteers.
U.S. military officials, for example, have planned through a project called Operation Northwoods back in 1962 to dress up Cuban refugees in Cuban military uniforms, have them attack Guantanamo Base and kill U.S. military personnel, sink U.S. military ships, and blow up shopping centers in Miami, targeting, killing refugees from Cuba to infuriate the American population so that they can invade and occupy Cuba. It's astonishing that anybody would dare to make a recommendation like that, but they did.
Then you can look at Iraq, fracture that whole part of the world, and now we have ISIS. So we have to realize the machinations and manipulations that go on behind the scenes leave us very vulnerable. And the big one is this one, where they could say, oh yes, the UFOs are real, but guess what? They're a threat, and we need to unite the world, like Will Smith said in the original Independence Day.
Something you want to add to this briefing, Captain Hiller?
No, sir. Just a little anxious to get up there and whoop E.T.'s ass, that's all.
Efforts on the part of a certain element within the kind of ruling structures of our planet to try to utilize the discovery of extraterrestrial intelligence as an ultimate threat, the ultimate other bad guys, to justify the national security state dream of locking down and putting under complete control of an authoritarian ruling class the control of the planet and the resources.
The nations of the world will have to unite, for the next war will be an interplanetary war. The nations of the Earth must someday make a common front against attack by people from other planets. General Douglas MacArthur.
They could pull it off. They could definitely pull it off. Right now, they have the technology to mimic the form, fit, and function of extraterrestrial UFOs. They have the technology, absolutely. It's seamless, and you can never tell the difference. If they do have a false flag invasion, they're going to use one of these. This is the Hudson Valley Boomerang. This is 1982 to 1989. Over 25,000 eyewitnesses reported this craft. They can use the saucers, the cigars, the pyramids, the triangles as a united coalition. And that's how they're going to do it. We're talking about 150 to 172 feet across for the wingspan, which is the identical wingspan of the B-2 stealth bomber. So the question we need to ask is, was some of that $22.4 billion used on the B-2 poured into this program? It's the exact same time frame. When they power up and when they accelerate, it looks like a spark off a grinding wheel, and you could never know the difference. So if they wanted to hoax an alien invasion, they could do it, and they could do it in a way that's 100% believable.
They started doing all kinds of psychological warfare entrainment of the public by staging hoaxed events, such as cattle mutilations. Oh, it's a flying saucer who did that. It's a covert paramilitary program, human. So if you wanted to start indoctrinating people into a false threat from outer space that Wernher von Braun warned us about, you would start staging events that look alien, but that are completely man-made, that are scary and scare the hell out of people.
UFO encounters are categorized into 4 groups. Close encounters of the 4th kind include people who claim to have been abducted by extraterrestrials. If you had a close encounter of the 4th kind and you are back, we're anxious to hear from you.
Inner stage left, you got these sort of anti-gravity devices with creatures that look like ETs that are actually man-made robotic systems. They're called programmed life forms. And you start doing select interfaces with the public.
So they've already got this psychological warfare already embedded into the minds of people to expect an extraterrestrial, not a secret aircraft, but an alien craft. So when they do pull this, they'll already have everything ready to roll.
These civilians got onto the base and got into something. They saw something they weren't supposed to see, and this group came out and went into their home and scared the dickens out of them and
staged an alien event.
Exactly.
The government will use the extraterrestrial phenomenon to cover their own deep black programs, and so that's the fight that we're up against here.
And then it makes it out through the movie industry and the UFO lore and the internet and what have you, and it starts creating this specter of a threat.
Get away from her.
Pardon me. Are you from Mars?
It's a moo-moo. Nicht Deutsch? It's a moo-moo.
More money for the Pentagon when its own auditors admit the military cannot account for 25% of what it already spends.
According to some estimates, we cannot track $2.3 trillion in transactions.
2.3 trillion with a T. That's $8,000 for every man, woman, and child in America.
The national security state realizes that that's a slower process, so they're now trying to hurry this up. There's a kind of an emergency process underway right now. Make no mistake about that. But it's now the military-industrial intelligence complex that are moving bureaucratically toward establishing dominion and control over the entire democratic process in the country, and that they're waging war, invading the Middle Eastern oil fields and occupying the oil fields, attempting to establish what they themselves refer to as full spectrum dominance.
A shadowy government with its own Air Force, its own Navy, its own fundraising mechanism, and the ability to pursue its own ideas of the national interest, free from all checks and balances, and free from the law itself.
What they've done is they've formed this alliance among themselves of the industry that makes money by building war machines the military that uses the war machines and justifies them, and then the intelligence community that is not really an intelligence community, it's a covert operations community, armed with military weapons and nuclear weapons, in that they're trying to push the boundaries now of establishing their dominion and full spectrum dominance over the planet. There was an invitation extended from the Vatican to some 40 world scientists to come to Castel Gandolfo outside of Rome, where the Pontifical Observatory is. And they spent a week briefing the highest level members of the Vatican. They came out with an official press statement. Extraterrestrial life is going to be discovered much sooner than anybody had previously expected. And for this reason, the time has now arrived for the beginning of a very serious discussion about the philosophical and theological questions that are posed to our human family by the discovery of extraterrestrial life.
Well, for decades, only crackpots and crazy people believed in UFOs. That's what I thought anyway. And then in recent years, it turns out that governments have been taking them seriously all along. Very serious.
After decades of denial and ridicule, government officials and the mainstream media are admitting that extraterrestrial civilizations are visiting Earth. But there's a twist. The same people and institutions who lied about ETs now framing the extraterrestrial presence as a threat.
When I see this thing happening with this To the Stars Academy, where they suddenly appear on the front page of the New York Times, and the CNN all of a sudden wants to talk with them, and they're on MSNBC and all this kind of stuff, I immediately kind of realized, wait a second, this is part of what I've been worried about coming out, because they were constantly spinning this story that this is a threat.
My name is Tom DeLong. A lot of people know me from my band Blink-182. I started that band when I was 16.
Through a series of meetings, I was soon connected to a large group of U.S. government officials from the CIA, the Department of Defense, and Lockheed Martin Skunk Works. These guys were the ones involved in the secretive U.S. government programs that dealt with these subjects.
What's happening is the To the Stars Academy people, we're all, Jim Simivan, who's there, the chief of covert operations, domestic for CIA, which in and of itself is totally against the law. The National Security Act of 1947 completely, clearly, and unequivocally prohibits any kind of covert operation stateside. But here, that's who he is. And there he is there. And you got the guys from the DIA and the Defense Department and Hal Puthoff and stuff. And they're all there. And what they're doing is they're putting this intense spin. Every single thing they talk about all has this kind of gestalt to it, that this is a threat.
And it very well could be a threat.
It's a threat to our national security. It's a threat to our airspace. It's a threat to our sovereignty. It's what it is. It's a threat to our dominion over our own planet. And of course, they think that's their job. Our job is to assert full spectrum dominance over the entire planet. We actually have the documents from the 1992 United States Defense Department Policy Planning Guidance document, where they said that right at the dissolution of the Soviet Union, said, we've got to not cut back on our military spending. We have to increase it so we can establish full spectrum dominance over the planet. And so you know what their agenda is, the national security state. It's not for the defense of our sovereignty. The national security state people, and potentially working with and through the To the Stars Academy, are going to be pitching this problem.
The danger of this, of course, is that this is exactly what all fascistic demagogues do to an innocent target, whether it be Jews in Germany or African Americans in this country. They will create sort of a boogeyman effect to try to get people mobilized against it.
Earlier this week, the New York Times and Politico revealed the existence of a secret government program to investigate UFO sightings.
It was especially focused on encounters by members of the military, like this one experienced by a U.S. Navy pilot off the coast of California.
There's a whole fleet of them. Look on the ASA. My gosh. They're all going against the wind. The wind's 120 knots from the west. Look at that thing. It's rotating.
Back in the 1990s, I was read into or briefed on a project that involved an interagency group that had the ability to disclose the ET presence in a way that would frighten everyone on Earth and convince the public that there was an alien threat, which is completely false. It's all a lie. And that this had been developed in the 50s, and they had been developing the means and the psychological warfare to make that happen. There are two kinds of disclosures that might happen. A truthful one that is also a hopeful one. And then there's the one that is spun, which runs like this. It's true, the UFOs are real. They're here as a threat. They're violating our airspace. They're a national security and a threat to our sovereignty. I'm quoting.
The purpose of the program, Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program, was really designed to do just that. From a national security perspective, identify those things that we see and try to ascertain and determine if that information is a potential threat to national security.
And we knew this was going to happen because I had met with people who were in these classified projects, who were on interagency committees that had everything set to roll this out, and they were just waiting for the right time. The Soviet Union has ended. We have the global terrorism, while it's still there, it's not like it was around 9/11. This is the next big thing that they want the public to be afraid of.
When a pickpocket meets a saint, all he sees are his pockets. Or like if you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And it's not that this isn't a genuine perception on their part, because they've been raised, their entire political and professional career has been designed to have this kind of artificial construct of this. There's this national airspace and nobody can come into the airspace unless we say so. And they've got this super control mechanism going. And they're right at this really important place right now where they're attempting to establish a kind of one world government. You know, that they've gotten the communication systems up, the transportation systems up, and they want to establish a planetary government. And there's nothing that is going to motivate the creation of a one world government like the discovery of an ultimate other. Ronald Reagan, standing in front of the United Nations, he said it right out.
Intelligence assets within Hollywood have made billions of dollars popularizing the narrative that humanity's first encounter with ETs will be a devastating bloodbath.
Mr. Chambers, don't get on that ship. The rest of the book, To Serve Man, it's a cookbook.
Let's go out into space and look at our planet over the last 100 years. World wars, hundreds of millions of people killed in war, the advent of weapons of mass destruction, our going into space in a competitive way with the Soviet Union for the Apollo projects and others, the degradation and destruction of our environment.
This national security state is the bane of our human existence right now. And so we have to start disassembling that national security state because, even assuming, say, Bernie Sanders hypothetically were to become president, the national security state isn't even going to tell him where the washrooms are. That whole group is going to descend upon him, and they're going to give him at least as much trouble as they've given Trump.
If you got into the office and you found out something about aliens, if you found out something about UFOs, would you let us know?
Well, I'll tell you, my wife would demand that I let you know.
So that's why they want Joe Biden and Kamala Harris to come in and kind of, continue to get things, quote, back to normal, where the national security state is functioning. They're all operation, they're all going to brief Goldman Sachs, and they're putting people from Goldman Sachs in charge of the economy, that kind of thing. We have to rise above those kind of dialectical politics, bring the people up, raise the consciousness of the people, and have this function through democracy. We've got the tools here. They're in front of us, and we've got access to the internet still. They haven't taken that away from us yet, but there's a short window here. Whereas, in fact, it's quite clear that it's their defense of the elite this 1% of the human family that basically ends up controlling over 40% of all of the wealth on the planet that they're really defending. And it's their world that they're trying to defend. So that you see that this is a subset of a larger question about how spiritual consciousness and the evolution of consciousness, of understanding what we really are in the makeup of the universe, is a threat in itself to this elite, because that is the dissolving away of these kind of differences among ourselves, and this coming into a full ownership of our proper place in the universe puts these people out of business as the ruling elite. And so that the raising of consciousness of our human family